This episode is brought to you by the Arvada Center. Relax under the stars at the Arvada Center's outdoor amphitheater with their summer concert series running now through September. This season features big names like Melissa Etheridge, Tower of Power, Preservation Hall Jazz Band, Spin Doctors, and so much more. Prime MTV. Cracker, Spin Doctors. You know what? Melissa Etheridge was in there too. She doesn't get enough credit. Actually, I'm going to go to that show too. Put that on my calendar. For tickets and a full schedule of live concerts, visit arvadacenter.org. That's arvadacenter.org. Today on CityCast Denver. Why can't we ride the bus for free this summer like we did last year? What is going on with all the construction on light rail lines downtown? And will we see a front range passenger rail in our lifetimes? CPR growth and transportation reporter Nathaniel Miner is back to break down all the latest transit news. Today is Wednesday, June 5th. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Nate Miner, welcome back to CityCast Denver.
Thanks for having me, Bree.
So there's been a lot of big transit news lately, and we needed to talk to you about it, frankly.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's go.
So I want to start with what the heck is going on with RTD not offering free rides for the summer. What happened?
This really is a state thing, actually. So if we remember back a few years, the whole program was started because state legislators and the governor's office wanted more people on transit. They kind of landed on free fares as an idea to get people back on buses and trains. Think like, I think it was 2022. So like coming out of the pandemic. And they funded it. They put up tens of millions of dollars to make it happen. And this year, in the session that just ended a couple of weeks ago, they just couldn't scrape together enough money to do it. So what they're doing, they passed a bill that has transit agencies across the state. Basically, they can make a choice. Either you can do the same free fare for better air type thing during ozone season, or you can apply for a grant to make fares free for kids for the entire year. And RTD they like the kids program. They've been doing a pilot of it for the last year or so. They really like the results of it. It's showing that more kids are riding, especially to school and especially in neighborhoods in Denver that are transit reliant and more black and brown than other parts of the city. So like in Montbello, they're seeing a lot more ridership, for example. They like that, and they're going in that direction with it.
So it was basically like either or, like fund this free fare a couple of months or fund the free transit for kids just throughout the year?
Yep, that's right.
Okay. And then there was something about a statewide transit pass. Was that part of this conversation?
Yeah, that was in the same bill. The bill was kind of this omnibus, like increase use of public transit in Colorado or some vague title like that. But yes, at the end of this bill, it's really they're setting up a committee to study how to make a transit pass. So if you see this in some European countries, but you've got local transit agencies, you've got big national transit carriers. Some places have their stuff together, and you can buy one pass that just works on everything. They want to do that here, or at least look into the idea of whether it's possible. So you get off a plane at DIA, you take the RTD A line into town, and then you take the Mustang up into the mountains, and then take an Amtrak back. It actually probably wouldn't work on Amtrak. But the idea is you could do all of that on one pass, which is kind of cool. So we'll see if it goes anywhere.
Well, I'm just thinking about the habit nature of the transit conversation, and the easier it's made, the less barriers there are, the more likely folks are to use it. So if they're not thinking I have to buy a separate ticket for the Mustang and I have to buy a separate ticket to take the light rail, I feel like that could be an easy sell for why this would be beneficial to everybody.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I was just in New York over the weekend, and the line of people that are standing there trying to figure out how to pay for the subway as they get off of the train at JFK was pretty funny. But, New York has this system now where you just tap your phone and it charges your credit card, or you tap a credit card and it charges that. So there's no pass at all. That's kind of great. I love that.
One day we'll get there.
Yeah, there's different ways to do it.
So, okay, I'm also thinking about a statewide transit pass and then this conversation about Front Range Rail. I know there's been news developing around that. I'm thinking about your whole series on the Ghost Train. What's the latest with Front Range Rail, Nate?
Yeah, so the latest is that there won't be big Front Range Rail news this year. Governor Jared Polis, huge fan of trains, clearly. Also historically mad at RTD for the fact that they have not built the line up there to Boulder and Longmont. He has been leaning on the Front Range Rail District for the last year to do everything they can to be ready for a ballot measure in 2024. And that would be like a sales tax increase that everyone along the I-25 corridor would vote on. And they've been doing that. They've been working on studies and meeting with city councils from like Trinidad to Fort Collins to trying to figure out like, hey, is this a good idea? Can we go to the ballot in 2024? And it was kind of a who knows, like maybe not. We need to keep working. And then finally, just last week, late May, the board made a final decision that they are not going to do that. So the soonest we would vote on it probably be 2026. So they still, I mean, depending on who you talk to over there on the Front Range Rail Board, they're saying now that what they want to do is use some money that the legislature is funneling their way to then go after some federal dollars, and they think they could actually get trains rolling without going to voters, like a really basic, like couple runs a day kind of thing, and then use that as, something to show the voters, like, hey, we started this, now give us more money in 2026, and we're going to make it really good. I don't know. Like, I think we have to kind of see how that goes. There was a lot of federal money from the bipartisan infrastructure law, but a lot of it's gone out the door to other states. And so Colorado is, I think, really scrambling to make sure that they have a good shot at whatever is left.
Is there any sense, if it did go to the voters and it did include a sales tax increase, any sense of how voters would feel about a tax increase to fund something like Front Range Rail?
Yeah, so they did some polling earlier this year that showed that there was support for it and that people would pay for it. The numbers, I think, I would have to check this, but they were in the 60s, low 70s, I think. But that support softened once they tested some negative messaging, basically. So in a campaign this big, it would raise millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, probably. And so that would mean there's a big giant campaign across the most populated part of the state. And that means there would be an anti-campaign, right? So they were testing out different messaging, and some of it, the anti-messaging was effective. And so that, I think, worried them. And they were going to do some more polling, which they haven't released yet. But now they're not going to the ballot in 2024. So I think they got their answer.
Yeah, so maybe TBD until the next round,
Yeah, and on the whole here, like, it does seem like a Front Range Rail line is closer now than it has been. I know this is something that's been studied and talked about for a long time. It does feel like this time is maybe different, but certainly the fact that they're putting off a vote for a couple of years does kind of make it feel like a here we go again situation. But, they're also living in the shadow of RTD and fast tracks and that sales tax increase that is still being collected and funding projects that are not done and might not be done in the foreseeable future. So all that is weighing on their minds, too.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about RTD and sort of zoom back into Denver.
Sure.
I feel like there's this recent news, it's kind of going to create a little bit of a headache for Denver riders. There's a bunch of downtown rail service will be shut down this summer for maintenance. So the L line to 5 Points is suspended. The D and H lines will be rerouted to Union Station. Nate, what's the reason for all these shutdowns and reroutes? Like, what kind of maintenance is being done? Because it's also expensive.
It's expensive. The simple answer is the track's really old. That line right in the heart of downtown, I think it goes up California and then back down Stout, and then up to 5 Points down Welton. It's been there for 30 years, a little bit longer than that. Hundreds of cars, thousands of cars roll over those tracks every day. Buses, big, heavy buses, and all that does a lot of damage. And it's just time to rip it all up and start over. And, I went to RTD's press conference about this a couple of weeks ago. And, they said all that. They're like, look, it's old. It's time to fix it. And we have been sort of picking away at it for the last decade, but it's time to just rip the Band-Aid off and do a bunch of these at once. What they didn't say was that it has gotten very bad. And so I found some documents that RTD filed with their state safety regulator, the Public Utilities Commission, that showed that at 19th and Stout a couple of years ago, the track was so bad that the bottom part of it had disintegrated into nothing. And they had ordered their trains to go as slow as 3 miles an hour. They couldn't go any more than 3 miles an hour because the track was just it was just shot. It was done. So they fixed that, but that sort of gives you a taste of the problem here. It's just things getting old, things getting beat down, and it's things like de-icer, like magnesium chloride. That kind of, the city will throw that down in the winter. It seeps down there to where the tracks sit and starts eating away at the steel. So it's time to get it done.
So as much as we're complaining, let's think about safety and wanting it to be a safe ride.
The only other thing I think that might be interesting, Bree, is that the current leadership of RTD, the CEO is Deborah Johnson. She's a veteran of the transit industry, has worked all across the country. Her take is that previous RTD leaders put off this maintenance, that they were so focused on building trains throughout the 2000s, 2010s, that they put off basic maintenance that would have prevented this from getting so bad now. And so she's here kind of trying to clean that up and making sure that everything is safe as it can be.
And that's not a fun job when you're the face of the thing that's costing so much money. But
yeah, and she gets frustrated with me when I ask her a question. She's like, Nate, I've been here 4 years. This is like a decades-long problem. I can't speak to that, which is understandable.
Well, I'm also thinking about there's this other thing happening where we're still trying to get, folks, there's still this push to get people back downtown. Do you think that this will impact that?
I'll say this, it's not going to help for sure. But think about downtown and think about what people come there for, especially in the summer for events. Most of it's in lower downtown, right? You're going to go to Ball Arena or Coors Field, especially. Upper downtown, where these trains go, is mostly office, right? So I think, if one stretch of track had to be ripped out, this is probably the less disruptive section. Because you still can take it up to Union Station, and they're beefing up the buses to help people then transfer to get to the other parts of downtown if they need to. So it can't help, but it's probably not as painful as it could have been otherwise.
So it sounds like it's a little bit strategic too, just thinking about the timing and who might be using it. Different seasons mean different amounts of people going downtown for different reasons.
And they have to do this sort of work in the summer. Can't really do it in the winter.
Yeah, true. That suck. This episode is brought to you by the Museum of Outdoor Arts. The summer comes alive with a dynamic lineup of events during the Museum of Outdoor Arts Marjorie Park Uncorked series, featuring live music and artful entertainment. The Sculpture Park also hosts candlelight concerts and Rock the Block, a special series of live community lunch shows. The Museum of Outdoor Arts has teamed up with pioneering immersive artist Lonnie Hansen to bring you his newest permanent installation, The Cabinet of Curiosities and Impossibilities, immersing viewers in historic artifact collections, one-of-a-kind art pieces, and wonders that will surprise and delight your imagination. Many events are free and open to anyone, and you're invited to bring your own picnic. For a full schedule of events and more information, visit moaonline.org/events. That's moaonline.org/events. This episode is brought to you by Central City Opera. Central City Opera's Summer Festival is almost here. Don't miss your opportunity to experience exceptional musical theater and opera in the intimate and historic 550-seat Central City Opera House just 35 miles west of Denver. This year, their summer festival includes Pirates of Penzance, Girl of the Golden West, and Street Scene. The Central City Opera Festival runs from June 29th to August 4th, with tickets starting at just $31, and they are going fast. You can find tickets and a performance schedule at centralcityopera.org/citycast. Book tickets by June 30th and use the code CITYCAST at checkout for 20% off all performances after July 18th. Again, book using the code CITYCAST at centralcityopera.org/citycast. Okay, so we're switching. We're talking about cars. So lawmakers passed a bill that would make it illegal to use your cell phone while driving in any capacity. Now, obviously, there's going to be some exceptions like emergencies, and you can still make calls using hands-free accessories. But Nate, there's been some pushback on this bill because some lawmakers are concerned about profiling when it comes to who might get pulled over. How was that addressed with lawmakers?
Yeah, so the main way they did it was to make using a cell phone a secondary offense. So you cannot get pulled over for using a cell phone. However, you can be ticketed for using a cell phone after you've been pulled over for something else. So if you run a stop sign or speed and they see you using your cell phone, you're probably going to get nailed for that. That's how they want to try to head off any profiling that might have happened.
Just from this particular thing. I mean, obviously, I get it. It's important to make sure that folks are focused on driving and not being on their phones. But I'm just thinking about, I see all these comments. There was a story recently in the Colorado Sun about cops are no longer really pulling people over for expired tags or, the speeding conversation we're having all the time. People speeding, running red lights, running stop signs. There's all these other things. I just wonder, are there even police to be doing this thing that seems to be being legislated?
No. Enforcement is way down everywhere that I have looked. I looked most closely at Denver, and this was about a year ago that I pulled data, and it had fallen by about 2/3 in the city. Where police are just not pulling people over anymore. And that is, there are consequences to that for sure. And if you talk to advocates about this, they'll say like, look, first we need streets to be designed so that it's hard to speed and it's hard to blow a stop sign and that sort of thing. And so that the street itself is doing some of the enforcement. But they, will admit that there is a space for police enforcement too. It's just, after the last 10 years that we've lived through as a country, racial profiling is clearly a huge problem.
Absolutely.
Clearly around driving too. And so I think that kind of explains where we are, which is why there seemed to be a lot of energy coalescing around automated enforcement now and cameras.
What did you think about that? There was that story in Morrison about that. The cameras they put up, and they clocked like 10,000 people in 2 weeks or something. What did you think about that?
I am actually digging into this a little bit, and I hope to have something in the next couple of weeks. But, Morrison did what the state has allowed them to do. So the state legislature passed a bill about, I think it was last session a year ago, that allowed local governments to use speed cameras in more places. And Morrison, kind of known as a speed trap town, kind of apparently raised their hand and said, we're in, and set these up on the edge of downtown. And, they've been kind of raking it in. We still have to see how many people actually pay these things, right? Because it's just something you get mailed to your door. And I also want to see some evidence that it is indeed slowing people down in the places where it really matters, because they put that camera on the edge of downtown going out of town, not into town where slowing traffic down is more important. So yeah, it's in between C470 and downtown Morrison. So I have some questions for them. And hope to get some answers in the next week or so.
We'll be watching for that story because I too am curious. That makes quite a difference, I think, if it's going in a direction that feels like it's going to impact or make things safer for pedestrians.
Yeah. Also, to Morrison's credit, they are about to start a big redesign of that downtown street. I think it's Bear Creek Avenue. They got a grant 4 years ago, and it's just now getting close to construction. So they're clearly doing the enforcement side of it, but they are finally getting around to the, built environment and redesigning that street to kind of force cars to slow down.
That's awesome.
Because I think we've all been coming out of a show at Red Rocks and you come cruising down the hill and all of a sudden you're like, oh, shoot.
You're just like, oh my God, I'm actually not on a highway yet, so maybe I should slow down.
Yeah. Because all of a sudden you're in downtown Morrison and you gotta slow down. So.
Well, it's good to know though that they've got the infrastructure piece maybe coming through. That'll be something cool to watch, because I think we talked about this on the show last week. But there's other mountain towns who just have very similar situations. For me, it's Estes Park has a similar sort of thoroughfare that is really for pedestrians, but cars go fast, and so hopefully the built environment changes could really help that aspect of it. Well, speaking of sort of the pedestrian aspect, before we go, I just wanted to talk about Phyllis Mack, because you did this great piece on her. She was a pedestrian and disability activist who lived over on my side of town in here in Ruby Hill. She passed away in May. She spent the last few years advocating for better sidewalks in her neighborhood. Can you tell us about Phyllis? Like, who was she?
I first met Phyllis Mack in March of 2022, and we were going down Alameda Avenue on the west side of I-25, and it was a miserable day. The snow was falling sideways. It was so cold. I can still feel how cold my hands were. And here's this 70, she was probably about 74, 75 at the time, in a wheelchair. She was there to show me and to show other people how kind of crappy it is to get around the west side on foot, or in her case, in her wheelchair. She, was a really kind of unique voice in Denver's pedestrian and street safety community, because she wasn't speaking for other people. She did that, but she was also speaking for herself and representing herself. Like, she just had this like voice of authenticity, because she was, I think I wrote this in the piece, she wasn't speaking for the city's most vulnerable residents. She was one of them. Yeah. She lived in public housing. She used a wheelchair. She was elderly. And she was just a force. She would go to city council and get people's attention. Her city councilor knew her. She would drag RTD folks around and show them that the bus stop needed work by her house. And she so I met her a couple of years ago, but she really kind of broke into a wider field of view when she got a grant to rebuild the sidewalks outside of her housing tower. That tower was built in the 60s in an era where the city just decided that people weren't going to walk anymore. And it's been there for 60 years, and the sidewalks are still really narrow in between the tower and the bus stop on Mississippi. And so if you go there now, you'll see people in their wheelchairs and people with their walkers going down the street.
Like in the actual street when the sidewalk is so narrow. Yeah. Yeah.
And so she wrote a grant application and got hundreds of thousands of dollars to rebuild and expand that sidewalk. That was about a year and a half ago. And the sad part is she died before the city could do it. The city told me they were probably going to get to it later this year. But, it's a sad story, but, I wanted to sort of lift her up as this example of a person who, spoke from her heart and also like understood how things worked. And as a journalist, I like, bringing those people to the community and saying, look, here's the best of us.
Yeah, and we'll share a link in the show notes. It's such a great story, because I do love you give the history and the context of the neighborhood, but then you talk about why Phyllis's voice was so crucial to making the money get there to get the sidewalks. And it is unfortunate she doesn't get to see it, but her legacy will be she got sidewalks built so other people in her neighborhood could get around safely. And it's such a cool story. Thank you for sharing her story with us, because I think it's just cool to remember you just are one person, but you could be powerful like Phyllis,
She will definitely be missed.
Yeah. Well, Nate, this was so great. I'm glad we could catch up. Thanks for joining me again.
Of course. Happy to do it.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed this show, why not take a minute to tell your favorite light rail operator about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you later. My kitties were Scooter and Spanky, and Scooter was named after the liquor store by my house.